Witam na kolejnym spotkaniu z cyklu Czasy ekonomiczne. Dzisiaj, jutro będzie z nami Brad Scott z Londynu, twórca takiej szkoły dla aktywistów finansowych w Londynie. Autor książek, m.in. Heretic's Guide to Global Finance, haker świata finansów, można powiedzieć, i dziennikarz, który opowie dzisiaj o komplementarnych walutach, o alternatywnych walutach i w ogóle o alternatywnych narzędziach, które mogą być takimi narzędziami hakowania światowego systemu finansowego.
So you guys all cool with English? Is that I'll try. I mean, I can try to speak quite slowly if that's. I mean, as a native English speaker, I get really complacent. I just go around and it's kind of like people who speak English as a first language always just assume that everyone else will just know English. It's a really like arrogant thing. So I'm aware of this. I wish I knew more languages. I'm actually from South Africa, though. I'm not from London. So I am from quite far away. Actually, in South Africa, there's 11 separate languages, 11 official languages. So that's yeah. Okay, so basically, I am Brett Scott. I wrote this book here, which is called The Heretic's Guide to Global Finance: Hacking the Future of Money. Also, if you can't hear me properly, let me know. I hope it's reaching the back. Is it reaching the back? Can you guys hear properly? Okay, cool. Also, if I speak too fast, let me know. Sometimes I'll start speaking really fast. I've been asked to speak on complementary currencies and alternative currencies, but this is just a very small part of what I actually do. In fact, I would say that complementary currencies and alternative currencies I mostly use them out of interest and for fun. It's not something I'm a professional necessarily in, and part of me tries to stay a bit distant from the alternative currency world just so I can, let's just put it this way, I'm not a kind of evangelist for alternative currencies, but I enjoy trying to use them to see what I think about them. Okay, so I was asked to speak about complementary currencies for Warsaw in particular, or is it Warszawy? How do I say? Yeah. The thing is, I don't really know much about Warsaw or Warszawy, so I don't really claim to have much. I don't really want to say very much about Warsaw in particular because I feel you guys will probably know a lot more about Warsaw. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by introducing some ideas around alternative currencies, and then maybe we can go into a discussion about how it would be applied in the Warsaw context or broader Polish context. Maybe I'll just quickly start with I said complementary and alternative currencies. There's actually a kind of a sort of a political debate, as it were, sometimes in the alternative currency world, where some people call them alternative currencies and some people call them complementary currencies. I don't know if the Polish translation has the same dynamics to it, but alternative is always about something completely different, whereas complementary is about something that complements, or it's like mutual, or sort of just it helps to add to an existing system. Obviously, complementary currencies is less politically contentious. If you say I'm starting a complementary currency, the authorities often don't mind a complementary currency too much. But an alternative currency is often seen as something which could be a bit subversive or a bit different or outside of the law. So something like Bitcoin, for example, very much calls itself an alternative currency, whereas sometimes a time bank system or these other systems call themselves complementary. So just have any of you used complementary currencies or alternative currencies? You have? Which one?
Bitcoin, for example.
Okay, you've used Bitcoin. Yeah. Okay. I know you have, yeah. Okay, cool. Well, I'm not going to talk too much about Bitcoin, but we can talk about it. I mean, I do use Bitcoin, and But Bitcoin is maybe not very relevant to a city setting. So I'm going to go into some other things. Just a few sort of broad points maybe about why you might think about why it's worthwhile creating a complementary currency. A lot of this often gets asked by people who don't understand much about them. It's like, oh, why would I create an alternative currency? Why would I create something different? You know, like there's a variety of reasons. On the one hand, there's a whole bunch of economic reasons. You know, you could say there's a local area that the economy is down, and you can try and use an alternative currency as a way to boost the local economy or get more employment in an area. So there's some kind of like economic arguments around why you might want to put an alternative currency in place. But a lot of the time, it actually has a big sort of social dimension, which is actually the point of them is often to try and get people to interact more, or to try and create communities, or to try and create local solidarity. So there's not necessarily this sort of pure kind of business type rationale behind it. Another thing you'll tend to find is they can be a lot of fun to use alternative currencies. So that's another reason just to try them out. They can be quite interesting and exciting to figure out. And though they're also a really great way to learn about how normal currency works. The best way to learn how a normal economic system works is to try and use something different, because it starts to show you what what is it about these systems that are so different. So it's as a learning tool, alternative currencies are really worthwhile. And then the last thing is, if you got more of an activist mindset, the use of alternatives has quite a subversive element to it. It's actually can be used as a sort of an act of resistance, as it were, to say, I don't like a particular system. I'm going to try this different system out as a way of showing that I have personal agency and I have can be creative. Is this staying the same? Is it, okay. So it can also almost be a type of protest act. Or if you're a performance artist, you might even say it's a kind of a type of performance art. Okay, with that, I'm going to go into sort of explaining it or describing. Are there any questions about that basic introduction there? So the first thing somebody's going to think if you say I've designed an alternative currency is, oh, so you're an economist of some sort, or you're some kind of like business person trying to do something with currency, because currency is always associated with quote unquote the economy, acts of production and distribution and exchange. Whereas actually, you could say that the creation of small economic experiments is a big performance element to them. Often they don't actually work that well from an economic perspective, but there's a very important kind of symbolic role that they have. So you could be acting out something different. And it might not last for very long. You know, actually maybe the experiment only lasts for a few months and your alternative currency doesn't stay, but there was an important kind of performance element to creating it. Does that answer the question? It's one way of thinking about it, and it's one way to say they're still worth creating even when sometimes they don't always work. Just like artists always create things which are temporary and then disappear. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go through a few different examples of types of alternative currencies that you find. This is quite a well-known one in the UK, in London. It's called the Brixton pound. And there's another one also called the Bristol pound, which is based on the same idea. Have any of you heard of the Brixton pound? Okay, it's basically there's a neighborhood in London called Brixton, which is quite well known in sort of pop culture because there's lots of riots in Brixton, and I lived in Brixton for quite a long time. I'm actually on the executive or the sort of advisory board of the Brixton pound. This is a very recent thing that's happened, partially because I use it a lot, so they thought they would give me a position in the organization. But basically, Brixton pound is a local currency that you can only use in Brixton. So I'm not sure what the equivalent in Warsaw is, but there are particular small areas or particular neighborhoods that you could create a local currency specifically for that neighborhood. The Bristol pound is related, but it's for the whole city of Bristol. And the basic idea is they get businesses to agree to accept this currency, and in a way, a big element of it is to show local economic solidarity. So the idea that you believe in your local economy. Actually, the number of transactions in Brixton pounds is pretty low. it's not very widely used, but everybody knows about it. So it's symbolically quite an important part of the Brixton economy. So let me go a bit about how it works. So you can see the first picture there. These are the actual physical notes. So they started out by creating physical notes for this, and they got graffiti artists and people to design this currency, and they made it visually very, very beautiful. You can't see it entirely there, but they've got really good imagery on them from local characters. Then the second thing they did was they introduced a pay-by-text system, i.e. you can use your phone to pay Brixton pounds. So they added a big technological element to it, which I'll go into. And then the third element was they created this is very new, that third thing there is a phone app. So it's actually, it's the same as the pay by text, except you have a actual, on your phone there's a map and you can choose which businesses you want to support, and you can, so they've created basically an iPhone app. So let me show you basically what it is. This looks a bit complicated, but I'll explain. The Brixton pound's actually quite simple. Basically, it's the British pound that you can only use in the local area. So it's backed by the British pound. So basically, how you get Brixton pounds is I take Brixton pounds to the Brixton pound I take British pounds to the Brixton pound organization, and I pay them British pounds, and they give me Brixton pounds in return. Okay. They take the British pounds and they put them in a bank. They can store them in the bank. Okay. So basically, it's actually a credit union that they use. So basically, there's a credit union sitting there with a bunch of British pounds in it, and then they issue the Brixton pounds against that. So the Brixton pounds can be taken back for British pounds. Does that make sense? Okay. So in a way, it's very easy to get people to use it because they basically think of it in a very similar way as they think of the British pound. And then what will actually happen, if this happens online, so I send an online payment to the Brixton pound system, and let's say I send 50 pounds. They'll then credit my online account with 50 Brixton pounds, and then to control that online account, I use my phone. So I send text messages to move money from my account to somebody else's account. In this case here, this guy's name is Sona. He runs a restaurant in Brixton, and he's on the system. So I can send a text saying, pay Sona £8, or 8 Brixton pounds, and it'll go from my account to his account. Economically, it's exactly the same as using a British pound, but the main difference is it's kind of like a branded British pound. It's a British pound that you can only use in Brixton, which makes it the Brixton pound. So in a way, the whole kind of ideology behind it is one of economic localism. So the idea is that you're trying to keep British pounds in a smaller area than they otherwise would be inclined to go. So in London, for example, if you are in Brixton, most of the money flows out of Brixton. A lot of the companies that operate in the place have their headquarters elsewhere, and the money is being sucked out of the local area. If you want to keep the money in the local area, you try and basically limit its movement. You can imagine there's problems with this though, because there's only some types of businesses that want to accept this. A lot of businesses have to pay all their expenses in British pounds and have to buy stuff from out of the local area. So accepting something in Brixton pounds presents a certain risk to them. So it basically is normally small independent businesses that start to take the system on.
I have a question. Do businesses use this currency in transaction between them? Is it also business-to-business currency? Or?
So it didn't start out as a business-to-business currency, which is perhaps a mistake. But so it started out as basically for consumers or people who want to buy stuff and be accepting businesses. What they realize now is that a lot of the businesses don't want to accept that because they have to pay their suppliers in British pounds. So the way that the Brixton Pound organization decided to try and deal with this, which they've done quite well, is they got the local council, the local municipality, to accept taxes in Brixton pounds. So the businesses can take their Brixton pounds and pay and use it to help to pay their local business rate taxes. Which is because the local municipality wants to support the idea of a local economy. And one way of doing that is to say we have our own local currency. So there's a political element to this currency, which is the local council, the local politicians have this mandate to say we care about the local economy, and one way they can do that is to say we support this currency. So there's a sort of a symbolism to it. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Okay, so that's does that basically make sense? The bricks and pound model. So it's a local currency backed by a broader national currency, and there's various other examples in the UK and around the world of the same thing. But yeah, like there's various other examples of the same model around the world. So yeah, in the UK alone, you got the Bristol pound has the same model. The Totnes pound is the same model. There's models in Canada and elsewhere that have the same idea. Are there any in Poland of this type of alternative currency? No. Okay. Okay, let's try a different type now. Who's heard of the time bank? Okay. Sure.
What is the benefit for the people from Brixton actually of using that, or it's only like that they want to support their local businesses and local?
Yeah. So that's a common question about it. Well, how the bricks and pounds tried different ways of trying to pitch it, but one of the main ways they've used is there was actually a discount if you pay in bricks and pounds. So if you go into the system, you basically get a 10% discount in the price. But it means basically the business owners have to give the 10% discount. And the way that the bricks and pound tries to convince the business owners to do it is to say you'll get more customers as a result of this. Because people who use the bricks and pound will deliberately come to your business because you accept the bricks and pound. So you'll get more business, but they get a discount as a result. But they've fluctuated because there's different, if you're trying to attract the business owners, there's a different incentives if you're trying to attract the customers. So they've changed it from time to time. Well, no, if you're a business owner, you kind of, the currency you accept, you want to be able to pay your expenses in it. So what they don't want is a situation where they accumulate a whole lot of bricks and pounds and then can't use it to pay what they need. I buy supplies or so that was part of the problem. And the way that the bricks and pound try to deal with that is like, all businesses always need to pay tax to the local council or the local municipality. So if we can get the local municipality to accept bricks and pounds for tax, that overcomes that problem. And they have managed to get them to accept it for tax now. Does that make sense? Yeah.
They cannot use it, they cannot change it in a bank for normal pounds.
Well, they can go back to the bricks and pound organization and do that, yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I mean, it's just whether a business owner wants to have the inconvenience of having to do that. But yes, but ideally, what the point is you don't really want people to be redeeming them back for British pounds. You're wanting them to keep the system as it's going. Any more questions on the bricks and pounds around that? Or we can talk more at the end about it. If I put £10 into the system, I would actually get £11 on the bricks and pound system, and if the business owner wanted to take the money out, they would lose 10%. So they had this incentive system to try and, but they've taken that away now. Now it's purely 1-to-1. Okay, so that's a lot of local currencies have the model of the bricks and pound right now. And actually, what the bricks and pound was quite good at was developing the IT software or the sort of the software packages behind it. They worked with some guys in the Netherlands, and they designed the systems to actually make it much easier to implement a bricks and pound system. So if you want to ever do a bricks and pound system, you should speak to them because they know exactly how to do it and implement it quite quickly. Okay, the time bank system. So some of you know about time banks already. The basic idea around time banks is quite different. It's to get people to exchange skills and services with each other, and to exchange them using units of time or hours. But there's a really big social element to time banking. A large part of the point of it is try to get people to meet each other. So it's often there's this kind of this sort of community element to it where you want personal interaction. This one here, which I'm showing, is the Echo Time Bank in London, which is actually it's the economy of hours. That's Echo, and that's showing some services that are available on it. I don't know if those are attractive to you as services, but there's a whole bunch more that you can get on there. I actually sell my book on there as well. You can buy my book for 2 hours, if you want, which is quite an interesting thing. Trying to sell a physical object for units of time is not an easy thing to work out how much you should charge for it. But we can talk about that. That's one of the problems of time banking systems. Is it's really hard to actually price physical goods in it. You can price things like I did 3 hours of teaching guitar. But how do you price other things? Just a quick little sort of background on how it basically works. There are different models, but this is the one that I sort of know. So let's say somebody owns a flower shop and they need some design work done on their website. They basically get somebody on the system and they say, you do 3 hours of design work for me. I will give you 3 time credits as a result. And what basically happens is they report this to the system. Sorry. I'm moving backwards and forwards. I used to play in lots of bands, and there's always this thing in bands where different types of microphones give you different effects. So I'll try and... Does that work there? Okay, cool. So they'll report, the basic idea is that the people do the transaction to themselves, or they look on a marketplace that's hosted by the site. They do the transaction, and then they report the transaction to the site. So in this case, Jackie says to the central admin, Lisa did 3 hours of work for me. Please can you credit her account with 3 hours? Now you see that Jackie goes into -3 here. So she owes the system 3 hours because she basically took 3 hours out of the system. And Lisa there can claim 3 hours from the overall system. So this is the idea that all the people sign up, and then some people go into credit, some people go into debit. And the idea is that over time they're supposed to basically pay each other back. So if I've accumulated 6 hours of credits, I'm hoping that somebody else in the system will eventually give me 6 hours back. And the websites or the central sort of body that deals with it, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to sort of manage these accounts and sort of show who has what in the system. Now, one of the actually, I'll quickly show you some examples from. This is a Polish example. I don't know if it's functional. Does anybody know this? Does it work, or is it sort of okay? I found it on a site. I didn't really know if it was going or not. What does Bank Godzin mean? Time bank. Okay. And this one here, I'm not sure if this is no. What does that mean, by the way?
That's a post-bank-based time bank.
Okay, cool. So you find a lot of these systems come up, they spring up, and then they disappear after a few months or depending on how well they run. So those examples of time banks. One of the main problems about time banks is that if they work, they're great. So you can have a system where people actually exchange skills, they learn things, they actually will meet each other as well. But often you don't have enough diversity in the system. So some people will accumulate credits because people want what they have to offer. So for example, I've sold 3 of my books on the system, this system here. So I have 6 hours on the system. But actually, every single time I go to the system to try and get somebody else to give me something back, you don't hear back from them. I actually try to get a massage 3 times now because there's a person on there who's offering massages. And I imagine what's happened is that person gets asked so much for massages because massages are popular that they've actually got sick of it and they don't want to have to give out any more massages now. So to make these systems work, you really need to get a balance of people and try to get a balance of goods and services that can actually work well with each other. You might even need people who actively go out and try to make the system work, actually finding people and sort of getting them to match up with each other. So it's quite a lot of work. It's quite difficult to make these systems work. And the other second problem about them is that it's not necessarily a problem, but they tend to focus very much on services. So it's things that people do outside of their main job. So I also, for example, I've played in lots of bands. I can do music, for example, but it's not the main thing that I do. So these types of things tend to be quite good in time banks, but then when you ask people to offer the services that they do for their main job, they often don't want to do it. So for example, if you're a highly qualified computer programmer and you try to get a computer programmer to actually offer programming services, they frequently won't do it. Do you know why? Why might people with high skills might not want to use the system?
But is the system based on physical hours put in?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is also a problem I encountered in one of the Polish time banks, that people with highly specialized skills didn't really want to put them in because they felt they were getting cheated up. And
Yeah.
so in the free market they would get like several hours worth of lower skilled
So
tasks,
absolutely.
1 hour of their highly skilled tasks.
Yeah.
While in the time bank it was always 1-to-1.
So the time bank has a real big problem with pricing things in terms of how much embedded time they have in it. So we can say, yeah, I spent an hour talking, but there's actually a whole lot of preparation time before this, you know? So you could say technically the amount of time I'm spending in this hour is longer. And if you're a highly skilled computer programmer, you might have spent years learning how to do what you do. Or maybe you're a doctor and it's also, you spent like 6 years learning how to do your craft. So there's all this embedded time in there which doesn't get priced into the system. So you'll tend to find people will offer these marginal skills, but they won't offer their core skills. So finding a way to deal with that's a big problem. And also when you're trying to price physical objects, that's another thing. Because physical objects, how much time did I put into writing this book? I worked it out. I think it was something like 2,000 to 3,000 hours. I'm not sure entirely exactly. It was like roughly speaking. But also, I make more than one copy of it. So if I only made one book and I spent, let's say, 2,500 hours, technically the price in the system should be 2,500, but nobody's going to pay that because the market won't work for it. So you have to try and imagine how many copies you would be able to sell, and then you try to divide it. And it's actually quite difficult. It depends on how many you think people will end up taking. So I came across with 2 hours for a variety of reasons. Partially because I thought, okay, let's imagine selling 1,000 copies at 2 hours a piece or something like that. I didn't really know how to work about. But there's also a market demand element. People won't spend 5 hours on this, even if that was the right price. They won't give you 5 hours for that. And I won't personally accept 1 hour for this. So 2 hours, I came across it as a sort of a basic, it was a rough thing I was happy with. And some people have, bought it at 2 hours. So finding a way to price physical goods in a time bank is pretty interesting. Are there any more questions on time banks?
Isn't government going to crack on this system like demand, time, 15 minutes?
So when governments tax time bank systems, they tax it in the main currency. They don't tax it in time, which is a problem. Because let's say you've earned 100 hours on the system, and then the government says, okay, well the tax on 100 hours is 150 pounds. And now you have to find pounds somewhere to pay for this tax. So because the government doesn't accept payments in hours as a thing. But often regulators don't look at these things until they get big. So they often look at time banks as like community projects. They're like, okay, we'll let it fly. It's fine. Like as long as you guys don't start doing core skills, like if you don't start actually doing most of your business in this, we'll write it off as a hobby type thing. So a lot of time banks, there's sort of caps on how successful they can become based on the system. There are people who actually, I got a friend in Australia called Carl. He actually pays for a lot of stuff with time and actually earns a lot in time. And actually, he's got to a point where up to something like 40% of his income was in that. And the government, he couldn't work out how he would have to report his income, and so it is a problem. But it would be a very good problem to have, because if you got to that point where the government was really worrying about this, you'd know that you'd been successful in actually setting up a really good time bank.
Have you optioned your music playing?
Sorry?
Have you ever optioned your music playing?
I haven't, no. I should though. I'll show you another system. Here, this is one last thing on time banks I'll say. This is a global time bank called Time Republic, which was set up last year. It's an attempt at a web-based time bank which isn't situated in a local area. So these guys, they thought, look, the small local time banks, there's too few people, there's too few skills to make it sustainable. We'll try to create a global one. And they made it look really, really good. So check it out. It's called timerepublic.com. But the problem is, again, now I'm on this global system, and I don't actually know any of the people who are on there. And it's I was actually the other day I was on the system trying to get design services for a logo I'm trying to design, and there were all sorts of people from around the world on the system, and I actually didn't really know who they were or how good they were. Often they were speaking different languages to me. So this is one potential option to try to get a bigger pool of people, but there's new problems that come as soon as you make the system bigger. But check it out. It's a decentish system. Have any of you guys seen it before or tried it out? Like you could use Facebook to log into it, and it's like it'll take your Facebook profile, and so it's quite advanced in some ways. Okay, mutual credit systems. Who's heard about mutual credit systems? Okay, Michelle? Okay. So mutual credit systems are actually quite similar to time banks, except they don't use time as a unit of measurement to measure the transactions. So the one I'm referring to here, called TEM, is actually based in Greece. It's in a place called Volos. I was there a month or so ago, in a small town in Greece called Volos, and basically there was a guy called Christos in the local community who decided that the Greek economy is obviously has gone down a lot, and he thought he'd start this system as a way to try and get some more local economic activity going. So his system's called TEM, and actually he's created quite a vibrant system, and you can buy all sorts of stuff in it. And that photo there is him showing us the kind of big area that they're using to build the system. They've got this whole huge old warehouse complex that they're turning into a big marketplace for this mutual credit system. And those there are some plants that are priced in the system, so you can buy physical objects in the system. I'll try and just briefly explain how it works. We have the same basic transaction here as before, so somebody giving design services to somebody else. Except the main difference is that it's going to be priced not in hours, but in a local currency. So it could be the Polish currency, it could be any other currency that you're involved in. The basic idea is that somebody agrees to give somebody else credit, to do work for them on credit. Okay, so the web designer there says, I'll do this web design for you, and then I'll basically do it for you without getting paid, but then I'll get credits on the system. I'll basically be paid on the system. So in effect, they're lending them money in a sort of implicit way. Okay, so the value of their services, they might say, well, the value of our services is 90 zloty. Did I pronounce it right? How do you... Zloty, yeah, okay. Say it again? Zloty or zloty? Zloty, okay, cool. So it says, my services are worth, let's say 90 zloty, but I'm going to give it to you on credit, on the mutual credit system. So it's a bit like the time bank system, which is saying, I'm giving you 3 hours of my time, and then you're going to give me these. I'm going to go +3 on the system. Except this one, it just says I'm going to go plus however much money you want on the system. So you see that they report their trade to the mutual credit organization, and Jackie goes -90 zloty, and Lisa goes +90 zloty. Now there's different ways these systems work, but now you'll see somebody's in credit and somebody's in debit, and now those credits can be used somewhere else in the system. Okay, and Lisa or Jackie at some point is going to have to pay back services. It's going to have to go back to zero. So in a mutual credit system and in a time bank system, all the credits eventually add up to 0. So there's, minus 90 plus 90. It nets out to 0 all the time. Okay, well, if it's priced in hours, the same thing. So that's a sort of quite a basic way of describing it. So in a sense, the idea of mutual credit systems is to get people to lend each other money without interest, effectively. They take a little bit longer to get your head around. Here's one local example. I don't know if it works exactly the same way on your system. Do you want to maybe give a quick description of yours?
Actually, it works exactly how you describe it. So it's a typical mutual credit system based in Warsaw, or it works also in other cities. It has 3,000 users and quite a big base of offers.
Okay,
so,
cool.
Yeah. An
Okay.
ad.
If you didn't know about, and how do I pronounce it again? I'm trying to get.
Wymiennik.
Wymiennik. Okay, cool. Trying to get my head around the pronunciation. It looks really cool. I haven't used it. It sounds like it's going well, so that's a very positive thing. I'm going to contrast your site to somebody else's site. This is Let's Link UK. Now I want you to notice the difference. That looks really nice. It looks good. This looks terrible. Okay, so one thing, if you're trying to ever design these systems, try and get like a good visual aesthetic, because it's very important for people to try and to believe in a system. This Let's Link system in London has basically died. It still exists to some extent, but it's really poorly used. And partly it's poorly used just simply because it's very unusable. I've tried to use this system in the UK. It's really hard to do trades. It's actually it's written in like 90s style HTML, kind of like it's really not usable. So one simple thing that can make a currency work or not is how well it's designed and how good your coders are. So I mean, I don't know. Some people use this system, but especially young people find this kind of like old school style of stuff really hard to get excited about. Okay, well, I just want to go. So one of the mutual credit systems suffer from some of the same issues that time bank systems suffer from. If you can't get enough people to the system, you can have some people accumulating credits if they've got a desirable skill, and others who go into debit but who don't pay back in the end. So you're needing to trying to create this balance of people to give each other services, and sometimes they will die. These systems will die if you have people not willing to give the credit and people not willing to pay the credit back. So they can sort of stagnate and end up not going anywhere. So one interesting example of a system that's done quite well to stop this is called Sardex.net. Do you know Sardex at all? So this is based in Sardinia. So a friend of mine called Giuseppe, he started this. And this is exclusively for businesses. So he started this not as for people giving each other services. It was for businesses selling each other stuff. And he was really, really rigorous about this. He said, if you're going to join this system, you have to commit to giving people credit, but then also paying back. And he had to develop systems to really make sure this was going to work. And he focused very much on core businesses in the local area. So people who definitely needed stuff from each other all the time. So, for example, a retailer and a computer manufacturer. So getting a real core economy going, and then building it from that outwards, starting to get ordinary sort of more single people into the system once he had set up the business core of it. I don't know how well I explained that, but and another element of his system is he has brokers. He has people going out to say, look, so-and-so needs computers, you have computers, why don't you give computers? So trying to like match make people to try and make the market actually work. So he actually pays these brokers to go and actually kickstart the system and get it going. So obviously it requires more administration costs, but it's been pretty successful. And actually he's trying to get a whole bunch of other systems in Italy going. Does that make sense? So it's quite like a sort of a large-scale version of a more local mutual credit. But But part of the whole essence of this is that there's a solidarity economy here. The local businesses who agree to be part of this agree to give each other services, and they agree to do it on fair terms. So there's part of it is saying we're all in the same boat, we're all in the same situation. Let's agree to try and support each other. So it's not the same kind of competition-based model. I mean, they're still competing with each other, but they have a sense of we're trying to improve our local economy. And the SADEX is very, very. They really stress this. If you're going to join our system, you have to agree with our values as well. So that's SADEX. And they've grown a lot, so go check out their website. Okay, I'm going to give you a couple more examples, and then we can go into more broad discussion. Okay, this is quite a fun example. This is a friend of mine called Eli Gottel, who designed a system called Punk Money, which is self-issued credit on Twitter. Okay, so in those previous examples of the mutual credit systems, we saw people offering each other services on credit, basically. But then there's a central body that keeps track. It says, you have 3 hours, you owe so-and-so 3 hours. So there's this kind of like way of keeping tally. On the self-issued credit systems, somebody promises something to somebody else, but then there's nobody keeping track, basically. So I promise something to somebody on Twitter. I say, I owe you a beer, or I promise you a beer. Okay, I've written this on Twitter. It now exists there as a sort of promise, and it's like an I owe you a beer. You could say that's a unit of currency, but nobody's going to make me actually. There's no enforcement, so it's self-issued. And if you don't trust me, you're not going to imagine that beer is going to actually arrive at that you're going to get that beer. So that's basically Eli's idea. He's like, let's create a self-issued credit system where you promise things to people, and then those promises can be transferable. So I can promise you a beer, and then you can transfer that promise to somebody else if you don't want that beer. You say, okay, well, I'll transfer it to you. And it was quite a fun system, and he designed this website called Punk Money to sort of track it, to just sort of show whose promises were around. But there's no enforcement at all. So it's quite fun to try it out if you're on Twitter. This was an example of a kind of an artistic experiment almost, because it was never really designed as a kind of hard economic kind of thing, but it got a lot of press, and people really enjoyed the concept behind it. And you could say it was almost a performance art type piece, and some people still use it. So it's quite an interesting one. So yeah, go do some Punk Money. He writes a lot about money as well, so go check out his blog. It's called Webesteem, or just type Eli Gottel, because he writes about the problems of these systems as well. Okay, the last couple of things, sharing systems. Notice in all the previous examples, there was somebody keeping score of who owed what in the system. I did 2 hours of work for you, now I'm owed 2 hours from the system. Okay, sharing systems often don't do this. It's people just giving each other without demanding anything back. So what's called the sharing economy is a big this is a big element of it. So here's an example from London called Street Bank, which is basically people just give each other stuff and don't expect anything back from it. So in the spirit of a new economy, this is quite a big movement, and the costs of trying to do this are getting much lower with information technology. So you can set up these systems where people can register what they want to give away for free, and then people can. So this is my account here. I can find out, within a kilometer of me, there's people who want to give away plants, and I can just go take them. And there's no recording of that process. There's nothing saying, oh, now I owe something back to the system. So it's all done purely on reciprocity. Do you know of any other examples of sharing systems? Couch surfing, yeah, exactly. Couch surfing is quite a good example. Have any of you couch surfed? Yeah. Although it's questionable whether, couch surfing, you arrive at somebody's house and then you're going to stay on their couch. Often you do have to give something back in some way. You take them for dinner, or there are these systems of exchange, and that's how it's kind of informal exchange. But on the system itself, there's no recording of an obligation. Yeah, free cycle is another really good example. Yeah. free cycle, just like, you know. Although on free cycle, there's also systems where you're supposed to give something before you can take something, and so there are. Okay, the last thing I'm going to say is a bit on the cryptocurrencies. Now, I don't know how much you guys know about cryptocurrencies. I mean, I'm involved to some extent in the cryptocurrency world. Cryptocurrencies are, it's hard to place them in a local context. So when we're talking about like Warsaw, it's hard to know how you get a local cryptocurrency. Because cryptocurrencies, by definition, part of the way they work is they're internet-based. So they are wherever the internet is, and the internet is global. So the locality of a cryptocurrency is global generally. So it's hard to make a case for economic localism with it. There are attempts at people trying to do this. So taking a cryptocurrency and trying to put it into a local area. And one of these examples recently has been this Hull coin. Hull's a town in north of England. I don't think this actually works yet. I know the guy who semi-designed this, but I don't think it's actually technically used by the city of Hull yet. And the idea was that we'll use a cryptocurrency and we'll make it for Hull, even though we can't actually stop people from outside of Hull using this currency. So it's questionable whether it's actually a local currency at all, if it's really anything. But I don't know enough about the design of this yet. So I'm a little bit ignorant about how Hull coin works. But there have been attempts to create localized cryptocurrencies. Does anybody want to know a bit about the cryptocurrency concept, or? Okay. I think the first thing I want to say is actually, in terms of the spirit of this festival, which is all about sort of, I guess, on all the series of talks, it's about local economies and sort of quite more sort of solidarity-based economies. You tend to find cryptocurrencies are often very different. They often have a very different sort of ethos behind them to some of, like, say, the local credit systems or the time bank systems or the Brixton pound. All of those systems are all about trying to keep energy in a local area. They're trying about sort of the design behind them is how do you get local people to interact with each other. Whereas something like Bitcoin, by default, the whole point about it is to be global, and it's also to be anonymous often. So it's actually to move away from local solidarity. It's to move to a bigger scale rather than a smaller scale. So there's some tensions in terms of stuff like Bitcoin is similar to local currencies in that it challenges a dominant national currency system, but they're actually pulling in different directions other than that. I don't know if I should go into how cryptocurrencies work, because if you're making a normal electronic transaction, who knows how it works, basically? How a normal electronic transaction works with your bank. Where is the money in your, let's say, your internet bank account? Where's it stored? Quote unquote stored. Okay, how is it stored in the bank? Yeah, okay. So all it basically is I'm not sure the local banks here, give me an example of a local bank. Huh? Pekao. Okay. They have imagine like an Excel spreadsheet with your account number on it, and every time you deposit money or get given a transfer, they just say plus 50, minus 25. This is like a list. And then like what's left? You have, 1,000 zloty left. And that's what they'll show you. It's just a list that they maintain. Okay, and that's these huge bank data centers where they maintain these ledgers, these private ledgers of who basically has what in the electronic money system. And all the banks, so then if you want to transfer money from one to another, you can't do it yourself. You have to ask your bank to do it for you because they're keeping score of your money. Okay? So you have to say, this I'm not sure, you over there, this is an example with Barclays. Hello Barclays, my account number is X. My PIN number is this. This is how I'm proving that I'm me who owns this account. Please can you transfer some money to somebody else's account, okay? You send that across the internet to Barclays, or send it however you want to send it to Barclays. They say, thank you, we've received this thing from you. We will move your money for you. They will contact the other person's bank and say, please can you amend your records? Change it on your Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to say minus 50 on Brett's account, and you must say plus 50 on somebody else's account. And they basically agree to do that among themselves, and then they tell the other person. So notice that the transaction never ever happened between you and the other person. The transaction happened between two banks. Does that make sense? Electronic money cannot exist without those intermediaries. So you cannot hold your electronic money. Okay, so that's the first thing to sort of to note. All that Bitcoin really does is takes away those. So that's a visualization of the central intermediaries keeping score of people's electronic money. Bitcoin takes those guys away and replaces it with a network of people. And that's basically it. Okay, so if you want to make a Bitcoin transaction, instead of sending the bank a message, you send this huge network of people a message and you say, please can you transfer money to somebody else's account? This network then checks your account for you. They then change something on a central ledger and record it for you. And then the other person can check. So basically it's imagine taking all the ledgers of the banks, sort of squashing them all together into a big central ledger that floats on the internet, and then having a way to input records onto that. Does that make vague sense? That's Bitcoin. And these people in the middle are called miners, basically. And that's probably as deep as I want to go into Bitcoin right now. But the basic idea is you're taking away central intermediaries and you're replacing them with a decentralized intermediary, a network of people. The same process happens though. You're still sending a message to something asking that a record be changed on a list. The only difference is that in the Bitcoin system, this is called the blockchain. It's recorded on this blockchain that floats on the internet. Okay, I don't want to go too much more into how, but as you can see, that's a global process. Politically, that's very different to a localist economic agenda. There's nothing localist about that. In fact, often people who are very interested in privacy and trying to stay anonymous who want to use that system rather than the other way around. There's dynamics to it, but it's not just that. But I'd say you tend to find a very different community behind the Bitcoin. The Bitcoin community is quite different to, say, your local currency community. Politically very different. Okay, that's kind of where I want to stop. But let's open up for questions or comments or experiences. We've probably got like another 20 minutes or so, I guess.
You spoke about time banks. So how does it work with Brixton pound and Bristol pound? Is there any interference of the government or the local government?
Interference of the government?
I mean, just taxing it. Yeah, let's put it this way.
Yeah.
Somehow,
so generally,
is there any way to put it in the accounting of business?
Yeah.
Do they do it?
So basically, businesses when they're accounting for these account for the stuff in exactly the same way as they would account for everything else. So they would say, I received, on my accounts, 100 British pounds. Write it down. I received 25 British pounds, and I received 60 Brixton pounds. From the tax authorities, they just view that as being the same as receiving 60 British pounds, and they're going to tax it exactly the same. Except they obviously won't accept Brixton pounds in tax, but they'll demand the same amount of tax. The way that they regulate, from a regulatory perspective, the government has changed its mind depending on what country you're in, but in something like the Brixton pound, for example, is viewed as being a voucher in terms of the legally speaking. It's not a currency, it's a voucher. So it's like you prepaid and bought a voucher which you can spend in Brixton. And they think about it like that. They don't think about it as a currency. And that's how they get around some of the laws. In terms of time banking systems, what governments will generally do, I'm not sure, it's different at different places, but they'll generally demand that you work out what the cash equivalent is, what the market value of what you've provided is, and then you estimate, okay, my 6 hours or something was on the market would have been worth X amount of money, and then that's what they'll tax you on. But as I was saying, the governments are not tracking time bank systems unless they're getting really big. So I'm pretty sure there's almost no taxation of most time bank systems. Bitcoin, that's quite a big issue. The governments don't know how to tax Bitcoin. There's all sorts of different rules coming out about it. In the UK right now, they're taxing it similar to an asset, I think. So they don't view it as a currency. They view it almost like as if it were almost like a share on the stock exchange. So they tax you on what's called capital gains. I don't know if you want to go into that, but like it's let's say I buy bricks. Let's say I get Bitcoin when their value in pounds is worth say 100, and then I spend the Bitcoin a year later when their value is 200. The government is going to look at that 100 in the middle and say that's a capital gain you've made, almost like you were paying with. But there's lots of complexities around how they don't. But there's no way of them tracking it. So they're relying on people stating that that's what's happened. It's a nightmare from a bureaucratic perspective if you're trying to actually monitor.
Okay, and I would like to know how the complementary currencies are being used to influence the governments, because you were concerned basically on the topic of solidarity and so on, and I would like to know if people use that to change their government's minds and so on.
To use what? Sorry, the
complementary currencies. Are they being used as a tool of influence or something like that?
Well, what they tend to do is that if you're in a local area, complementary currencies, people who run them will tend to approach the local authorities, so not necessarily your national government, but your local government, and say this is a good tool for local economic development. So if you want to be seen as trying to serve people in your local area as a politician, get behind this currency. It has a similar. It's like local languages. People feel proud about local languages. You're having your own language. There's a similar thing with currency. If you have your own currency, there's something kind of. It has a sort of localist solidarity element to it. So something like the Brixton pound, people are proud to use it because they're part of Brixton. So like, and then the politicians want to get on board with that because they're like, oh yeah, we also support Brixton. We also want to show that we. So that tends to be the political dynamic. Again, it's also why this term complementary currency is used rather than alternative currency, because these people who run the systems want to be seen to be cooperating with authorities often, rather than trying to. But that said, I mean, I've recently been part of a sort of a kind of research project for the House of Lords, which is this old institution in the UK, this old like archaic group of old men who sit around and make laws. And they don't know anything about local currencies, and they just view them as being stupid and like having no importance to the world, which of course for them is that's how they see the world. So we produced a sort of brochure showing them how they work and so on. So yeah, because the political impulse is always that I better clamp down on something, not necessarily because I don't like it, but because I'll get in trouble if something goes wrong with the system. So there's this natural conservatism among politicians. They're like they're used to what already exists, so they don't want to rock the boat. So local currencies they always look a little bit iffy about because they don't understand what they're for. So there's a lot of diplomacy that goes into it. Sorry.
My main problem is that I cannot really see what is the advantage of all your examples you put forward, because on the whole you can do everything within the official systems too. No, you can.
Yeah.
Everything you can do there, you can do with. You don't need a second one. I understand it is a sort of bringing people together, of a sort of privacy, of a sort of. You can do it with friends, but it seems to me rather than a little bit of a game, no. Pretending to be out of the system, but in fact, you are in, because there was an idea when computers have been invented. There was a thought. People were convinced that you need for every system you need another type of computer, another type of, and so on. So there was, and then it was found you need only one. By and large, you can do it with one program and so on. And here I to a certain extent, I
So that's
have
a
the same
very
problem.
common sort of criticism. One point I make is mutual credit systems, I disagree. So mutual credit systems for small businesses are often a way for them to get credit where they don't otherwise get it. So, for example, if you are a small business in Sardinia, and it depends also your banking system as well. So if your banking system is not responsive to small businesses, which, for example, in the UK is often the case, they often don't care about small businesses and actually don't have the expertise to lend to small businesses. In the context of a crisis, a lot of banks will stop lending. All right, so if you're a small business, a mutual credit system is often counter-cyclical. So you could actually draw on this credit lines at times when you're in trouble. So they are often mutual credit systems, like the SARDEC system, is used when the economy is going down. When the economy is booming, people are think, okay, we don't need these other systems. But as soon as there's an interest-free credit line and a mutual credit system, that's quite compelling for a small business owner. And there's been systems, for example, in Switzerland that have been going since the 1930s like that. So there's definitely like a quote-unquote economic reason on that scale. But for some of the small town banks and bricks and pound and things, I agree that there's often a lot of.
But even for that, you don't need another currency. You can have an agreement with your.
Yeah, but the mutual credit systems. Yeah. No, but the mutual credit systems don't necessarily call themselves a different currency. They often use the main currency, the dominant currency to keep score. But yeah, I mean, I agree. But you could say similar things for, why do we have national currencies? Why don't we just have a giant global currency? Would that not be more efficient to have a giant global currency? But actually, sometimes local currencies are more intuitive and actually can take into account local economic factors better. So it depends. And also one of the questions that local currency enthusiasts will often talk about is monetary diversity. There's problems in a society when you only have one form of money. If you're wanting a resilient system. So a single form of money might be efficient, but efficiency isn't necessarily always resilient. If you have the same monocultural system, the same system, it's subject to the same collapse. So the whole system can go down. Whereas if you have a more diverse system, you tend to have, and that's a permacultural principle, kind of like building diversity into a system. But I admit, it's hard to make it work.
I was curious if the complementary alternative currency system isn't used to, let's say, politicize or bring awareness to certain issues when occupations are not respected or not treated in a market value. I'm just going to give you an example. Labor of mothers who stay home, they're housewives, and they absolutely are not reimbursed for their work. If there were any instances of such situations in a society where at least a time value or a kind of a mutual exchange system would be offered for that.
Well, exactly. I mean, I would argue that huge amounts of work in an economy are non-monetary or exist outside of the monetary economy. So childcare and mothering is an obvious example of that, but there's lots of other ones as well. There's lots of informal work that's done in the economy which people don't get paid for, but that the market economy could not exist without. The question you want to ask yourself is, do you actually want to bring those things into a monetary system? So you do find currencies that are developed to try and reward, say, charitable acts, for example, and say, okay, we're going to give you, if you engage in charitable acts, we'll give you these charity credits to say you've done it. But psychologically, it's not always obvious that people want to be overtly recognized in a market type way for those types of actions. But the problem is, how do you get that work recognized unless there is these forms of currency? I personally don't know. I mean, from the mothering example is good because, I mean, I suspect a lot of mothers would say we don't want to have it quantified, our work necessarily, but we want it to be recognized. But we don't want it quantified. Because the quantification is part of the sort of market dynamic. So I'm not sure how you reconcile getting work recognized without quantifying it in an overt way.
What is money or currency for you? Because I'm thinking a lot about it. And when you asked, where is this money? When we have a transaction with banks, where is your money kept? Because money, by and large, as you say, is a symbolic factor. Money doesn't exist as a material thing, nor is it virtual. It is a relationship between you and me, which has in the symbolic of our relationship is money.
Yeah.
What I like with the idea is that money is seen in labor proportions. This is really a leftist point of view, you know, because that money, that the nature of money is coming out from my work, of my minutes of my work, of my product, and so on. Do you see it in the same way, or do you have I mean, what is...
Well, yeah, I mean, money is not a commodity. Money is not a commodity.
So what is it?
So it's a social contract.
Exactly.
But people think about it like a commodity. So part of the dynamic in modern monetary systems is that people often think about money as if it's a thing, when actually it's a kind of a process that exists, it's held in the community.
But that brings me to the point that maybe the advantage of your ideas, or what you showed, is that it is shown that it is a contract, much more than in our official contract.
So actually that's kind of, on that sort of performance element, part of what these currencies show is how actually...
What is the nature of it?
It shows the actual basis of what normal money is.
Yes. Exactly.
All right, because actually, you know, something like our normal money is a bit like a mutual credit system. You know, a normal note that you hold is not that different. It's just on a much greater scale. All it is, it's a claim on the society.
And it's in clouds. You cannot see it. Nobody can see it.
Yeah, but the nature of money is a very interesting thing to delve into. But I'm not sure if we have much time to go deeply into it. But it's absolutely right. Social contract backed by power and backed by legal status. Money is given a certain reality by the legal nature of it. So, you know, if somebody creates money and it's given a legal backing, it cannot just be destroyed. Now that legal thing exists in society as a kind of fiction. So, which is different to say like a solidarity economy where you might create I owe you something, but it's not legally backed. We agree among ourselves to honor it, but there's not a legal backing to it. So much of what money is taking what used to be something that was a social relation and codifying it and sort of formalizing it.
So yeah, you could say that money have been hijacked by the powerful institution of the state and also financial institutions, the banks, while it used to be a social contract. So do you think is it possible to imagine a money system that doesn't rely on the power and the institutions, you know, the authority of institutions like the state?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think
how would it function?
I don't think there's any point getting too like what's the words? Look, there's a certain reality to society that we have huge societies. So some of the ideas of small-scale localist economy doesn't make sense often in huge cities and like large-scale modern industrial society. There's a certain economic distance everyone has from each other, which is hard to. So it's hard to go back to an idea of, you know, a local economy where everyone's contained in a small town and you can all exchange goods with each other. So in some ways, we kind of have to accommodate this idea that, look, we do live in countries that have, 40-odd million people. How do you design monetary systems for that number of people? And often the mainstream fiat currencies have been the most successful at doing that, but there's also the problems that go along with them. Whether you can replace them completely is a very difficult question because you still have to find stuff that works at scale. Or else you have to implement so many local systems that that kind of link up to each other. So in the kind of like anarchist thinking, which often has a kind of localist solidarity element, this is part of the idea, is you create lots of local small systems and then try to link them up in some way. It depends. I mean, I'd love to see that happen, but I'm not sure whether that's... There is something to be said about the idea that there's different tendencies in people. Some people do appreciate efficiency, so something like ease of payment and how much stuff. So with say, for example, a national currency, with that national currency, you can walk around the whole country and you can claim stuff from shop owners across an entire, sort of a huge network of people. The smaller you get, the more inefficient it gets from a sort of short-term perspective. So you're trying to always, with local economy initiatives, you're always trying to balance this idea of people's drive for efficiency and ease with connection and human interaction. And actually, there's no easy way of balancing those two things out. And there's no point trying to push for only one or the other. I'm not sure, that didn't really answer your question, but in a monetary system, it's pretty hard to design only local systems.
But isn't that exactly the problem? Because I think most of us, we would like to try to get out of the system, because Greek is a good example. What the currency system with the Greek people did, you saw it when you told us that you've been in Volos, you know what you can see it. And we try to go away from this official system, and we pretend that we can produce an alternative, but by and large, I think pretending and making people even believe that we can, but in fact we cannot. So that's a negative.
Depends on how I guess. So a type of sort of horizontalist, anarchist styles of organizing tend to be. There's a tense relationship with, say, more old school kind of like straightforward Marxist critiques of society, which say you need wholesale change of things. The problem about wholesale change is incredibly politically difficult. So you can try and change an entire system at once, but it's incredibly hard to coordinate people to change everything at once. So small solidarity economy type initiatives are actually often very empowering for the people involved, but they don't necessarily claim that this is going to change an entire system. The thing I suppose people are thinking about now is with the advent of a lot more efficient technology, whether these local economy initiatives can actually be made a lot more efficient and actually be a lot more easy to create. So there's a sort of technological element which is coming out now. So maybe you can actually have efficient local economy systems which are linked together technologically in a way that makes them more than just in a small area. Again, people are working on that idea. It's still nascent. It hasn't actually been perfected. But one thing I do know is that, say, among young people, for example, in the UK, ideas around, say, large-scale union organization to change an entire system are getting very, very, very hard for people to buy into those ideas when they've grown up in, say, the 1990s. A lot of the older forms of left-wing movements don't have any appeal. So I guess local currencies are quite interesting because they blend in some of the anarchist movements with technology movements. So I'm not sure, it's getting a bit abstract.
Do you know by do you know by chance what happened with this Argentine system? Because in Argentina it was quite a large system, but it came out of necessity because it was relaxed. People had no other chance. So it was a huge labor bank. Functioning. But do you know what was the end of it, or is it still working?
Well, a lot of these systems are counter-cyclical, so they tend to emerge when people need stuff. So there's a practical element. If your local economy is tanking and the current system's not working, people seek alternatives. So that's what happened. I mean, I don't know all the details of that case, but they tend to then start to struggle as soon as the economy starts to boom. And that's much the same as in Greece and a lot of these places. There's a flourishing of creativity where people need creativity. But then they get sucked back into the mainstream system as soon as it becomes convenient to do so again. And it's mainly because the mainstream system appeals to short-term efficiency. That's most big systems that have scale have become big because they got something that's efficient and short term about them. So like large supermarkets, for example, get big because they're appealing to a short-term convenience element. They might destroy the community in the process, but they can get to that point because they're able to tap into that short-term element of people. So that's the kind of like that's a key sort of capitalist dynamic. So and when that system then falls apart, people go back, but then they get sucked back in when it comes back in. So it's an ongoing political struggle. But as I said, I mean, it's getting a lot more easy to implement these systems now than it used to be. So that's a cause for investigation. I'm not saying that somehow local currency is going to change the entire world, but there's definitely interesting. Sorry, do you want to?
But what is your dreamed solution
I have no dream solution. But for what?
for this, let's say, monetary system?
The world's too complicated to have a dream solution. Like it's, I would need to spend like another 30 years learning stuff before I'd know what the solution was. Because you can't say that every aspect of every system is. There's systems that have trade-offs built into them. It's about what you're trying to optimize at any one point. It's not like the current system is all wrong, or another system would be all good. It's like, what do you most want to emphasize? The problem with the current system is that it destroys the ecological systems with rapacious growth. It distances people from each other with all sorts of things. But it's also quite good at doing other stuff. It's actually there's reasons why the current economic systems become successful. So I guess I don't dogmatically hold on to any particular thing. I continue to explore, and that's actually one of the reasons why I'd say it's worth trying out alternative currencies, because you'll start to see, what is it about this that actually I do like, and what is it that I don't like, which part of this is actually worthwhile, and what's just wishful thinking.
It's interesting what you said, because you basically said that the current system destroys the basis of our survival, but it's good in some other aspects.
Yeah. Well, it's obviously successful,
Yeah, it's successful, but what is the problem with the main problem with the current money system? Because we haven't really criticized it well, I think. So, what is the problem with the current money system?
I don't know what the main problem with the current money system is. I mean, it's different.
The way it works. I mean, the mechanics of it.
So you want to go into like monetary reform movements and so there's a whole body of critique around how money is created with the private commercial banking system. That's one body of stuff. Like they're saying that the way that money is created in society is there's something wrong with that, or it gives too much power to banks, or it transfers wealth in some way. There's another body of critique which is a bit different, which is more psychological, which is saying the way money has a way of distancing people from each other. It's a kind of a separate issue. Money is basically a way to facilitate arm's length trade. All right, so it's a technology that tends to emerge or tends to be used when people don't know each other. All right, so you don't really have monetary systems in small communities because they don't need money to engage in exchange. You can have reciprocity systems. But money has historically, there's emerged in situations where there's social discohesion, or so where people have a greater distance between themselves, and kind of defer trust to this monetary thing rather than themselves, or between themselves. So you could say it's a technology for exchange, but quite distant exchange. And in the process, it tends to alienate people from each other. Now that's the whole body of a sort of like psychological critique of money. And actually some things like time banks and mutual credit systems, part of what they're trying to do is to move that back. Say, we're trying to take away the alienating aspect, the psychologically alienating aspect of money, to make exchange a more meaningful process. All right, and that's very different to, say, trying to change the way money is created by the commercial banking system through fractional reserve banking. So I'm not sure how much you want to go into the whole monetary reform agenda. Yeah, but you got to separate out different problems. Like it's you could say, for example, solve the problems of how the banking system works, but not have dealt with the fundamental sort of psychologically alienating aspect of normal money. Because most of the money in society is created by the commercial banking system. I don't know how people know that as a thing. A lot of people think money's made by central banks, but it's mostly made by commercial banks. So reforming the commercial banking system is there's a monetary policy, or there's a monetary reform element to it too. But in terms of movements for banking, I'd say there's say for example there's the ethical banking movement, which is trying to get banks to lend differently, okay, and to get banks to pledge to lend money in a sustainable, socially responsible way. Then you have, say, local banking movements, which are trying to get banks to get smaller and to focus on local areas. It's a bit different to saying you should lend ethically. It's saying you should focus on a smaller geographic region. You then have, I guess, a whole lot of sort of technical movements around splitting banks up and taking investment banks away from commercial banks, and so kind of structural changes to the banking sector through policy. And certainly in the UK, those are the types of movements you'll get. And then I guess you get these sort of much more grassroots community type initiatives which are saying, let's move away from banks entirely and create our own systems. So for example, mutual credit systems, or else, for example, peer-to-peer systems. That's like, using internet-based platforms to bypass banks. So technological, they sort of bypass banks to some extent. These are different tendencies. I'd say the ethical banking movement was probably one people know about. I'm not sure how many ethical banks there are in Poland, or banks that call themselves being ethical, who have a policy around what they lend to. But that's quite well known, and to some extent. But it's also, you could argue that probably more profound are the ideas around local banking. So trying to make banks smaller and more responsive to a local community. And this is so the big stuff around trying to create credit unions and trying to create local banks is around how do you make what the financial systems become so fixated with scale. Banks get bigger and bigger, and as they get bigger and bigger, they can no longer see smaller players in an economy. So they just disappear off the map, smaller players. So if you're trying to go back to a local economic system, you try to get smaller banks. That doesn't necessarily change the fundamental economic system, but it can make it more fair. It can make it more just. It doesn't necessarily change the way business is done, overall. Tomorrow in my talk, I'm also going to go into banking a lot more. I can't really hear you.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. You said before that in this, how do you call these currencies? These social-based currencies that we are talking about. There's a term for it.
The time banking or mutual credit.
Okay.
Or,
let's say
local currencies.
This kind of currencies. You said that they are based on permaculture principle. Yeah.
Well, you can perceive them like that, yeah.
And what exactly is? Could you say more about this permaculture thing?
Permaculture. I'm not a global expert on permaculture, but the basic idea around permaculture is, well, it's a whole bunch of different principles towards ecological design, basically, or design that takes into account ecological processes. In financial terms, a permacultural system, well, let's say in agricultural terms, a permacultural system might be a system that attempts to extract a yield from the earth, but tries to do it within the boundaries, say planetary boundaries, tries to actually do it within the limits of the ecology. Okay, so you can say a fishery, for example. You actually you can
Sorry,
take
within the limits of what?
Of the local ecological system.
Okay.
Okay, so taking into account the actual constraints. So you can create an ecological, a permacultural garden will be trying to take into account the different seasons, what you can actually take out of the environment without degrading it. So it's basically trying to keep a steady state trying to put back into the system as much as you take out, so it stays the same. Okay, so if you're running a fishery and you're taking out more fish than are actually able to reproduce, your fishery will die. Okay, so that wouldn't be a very good permacultural system. So permaculture is this whole system of design where you're trying to do that kind of thing. I mean, that's probably more to permaculture than that. So with the financial system, so let's take interest, for example. A large part of the way that interest works in society, when the banks are lending, they're extracting, so they're lending money, they're trying to extract interest back out of society. Okay, so they're extracting a yield. The way that they're doing that is often the interest is actually outstripping what you can actually take out of a society. So it's kind of parasitic. There's a parasitic element to interest. So if you're designing a permacultural system, you'd be trying to limit the amounts of interest so that it's actually sustainable. So you'd only be taking out of a society what could be meaningfully created and regenerated. So, for example, there are banks that try to model themselves on permacultural principles. They say, okay, we'll lend money, but the rates of interest we're going to charge are going to be quite low, and we're going to try and help the people pay back. Okay, so it's like we're going to try and regenerate the environment as we're interacting with it. There's a kind of a permacultural principle. Does that make sense there? Okay. And then so another element of permaculture is this whole element, I mean, I'm not an expert on this stuff, but like diversity in systems. So if you're trying to manage a system, you want to try and create diversity in it to maintain resilience. So if you're designing something with like a permacultural garden, you have a whole bunch of different types of elements rather than just a single crop or a single thing. You have a whole bunch of different elements which can work and complement each other. So complementary currencies have this permacultural element where they're often trying to bring a more holistic system into being. So you might have one electronic currency that's very good at doing commerce, for example, but it's terrible at bringing people together. So you try and introduce a new currency to introduce more diversity into the system. It's quite abstract. Sorry, I'm not sure if that's making sense. Permaculture is a huge body of design thought, though, so I don't know if I can do it justice. And yeah.
Okay, so maybe an example. If I take rests from my house, organic rests, all kind of shit, put it in a place and mix it in the right proportion of nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon, and throw some pumpkin seeds in it, which grows everywhere. You can just throw it to the ground and it grows. Yeah. Would that be permaculture?
I don't know. Well, you tell me. Would that be permaculture? Probably not, unless you've got a system in place to make sure that like what you're taking out, you put back in, or you regenerate it. I'm not sure. Are you a permaculture person? I sense you are. Come on, give me the 12 principles of permaculture.
No, I'm not really a permaculture person. I'm wondering how many people in a general society would know what it is.
Probably not very many. And they actually do, probably when you explain people permacultural principles, they're often very intuitive. It's like, don't fuck up a system. Don't take out more than what goes in. Like, people understand this stuff. It's not rocket science. And actually, calling it permaculture is often like sort of giving a name to something which is otherwise very intuitive. Like use energy efficiently, or like if there's sun coming, why don't you use it? Why don't you position your house in a way that makes use of that energy? Everyone understands that principle. So but just that people are often alienated from that understanding and told they don't understand that.
So keywords would be observing nature or natural thinking and intuition.
Actually, if you want to look on a human element of permaculture, like observing systems, the whole kind of like observing ethic. A lot of banks, for example, when they're trying to design, they come into a local community, they got one product. It's like, you take this mortgage or else that's it. We're not going to come here if you don't take this mortgage. We have a single set of things and we push it on you regardless. And we don't really care whether you take it or not because we operate at scale. So we don't want diversity in our banking operations. We want a short line of products and that's it. They don't pay any attention to the local dynamics. If you were a permacultural designer, you would spend a lot of time observing local dynamics. You'd watch how people actually interact, what people actually do, how they use their resources. And you'd try and design based on that system in a much more local way. And that's, I guess, that's a kind of an observation principle, which then tries to use that to inform a kind of sustainable design process. Banks don't do that, definitely not.
So in this currency thing, permaculture principle would be observing and basing the local economy on relations that
and
you
actually
really
one thing I wanted to say, people shouldn't fetishize the currency itself. Currency is just a social tool, convention. There's no point introducing a local currency unless you're actually tailoring it to how people actually behave and actually taking into account how people really live. The economy is based on people and people doing things. Something like a currency has to then fit into that if you're designing a new one. So a lot of mistakes that local currencies make is people are, say, ideologically driven, for example, to create something different and then just sort of try to dump an alternative onto people. And people are like, well, we don't actually live in this way. So there's always this kind of like interplay where you're observing how people live and then trying to introduce things which they can understand, but also might change the behavior in a positive way. So there's kind of like interplay of design processes, I guess, That makes sense.
If I may have one last question.
Yeah, sure.
How I understood the whole topic of a more bigger currency, like the global national currencies and so on. That the issue with it is that it, in a way, carries a negative load of debt or destructive factor somehow. And I know that in Iceland, this revolution from not so far ago in the banking system somehow could be an example of a real practical application of a banking system based on real democracy and relations. But there is not much information coming. I mean, it's difficult to access information about it. Would you know much about it?
I don't know enough about the Iceland case. No. What can you explain? What you mean by that? So people, the banks really stuffed up, and then people basically kind of took them back.
I mean, what I understand, the issue with national currencies is this political, very often the political debt involved, or political war factor involved, and so on. Speculation and stuff like this, and local currency is trying to get this factor out.
Yeah.
So in a way, in Iceland, we could observe exactly this process.
Yeah.
This factor to be cut out, but I mean, I don't know much detail about it.
The way that most money is created, it's through banks lending. So most money is created via bank lending. Okay, so the banks that are creating the money are at a very large scale. The lending that they'll do to create the money. So this gets a bit like weird because I don't know how many people understand how money is created. But large-scale banks will tend to lend to very large-scale, often destructive projects. So the way that money is created in the society, it's created in the process of financing quite destructive things. Whereas if you have smaller banks or more community-owned banks creating the money supply, you could say that the money is created in a more sustainable way for things that are actually that could actually be good for the community or sustainable. I'm not sure that didn't really answer, but Iceland's a very small community. It's a very small country, so there's different dynamics of how much. I don't understand it well enough to answer your question with any kind of very well.
Okay, thanks.
But maybe we can chat afterwards. I'm not sure if I quite got what your.
I ask you because that's exactly the problem. Because I think as long as you have in the system an open hole, that means the central banks or the Fed producing money, creating money, just giving it to banks for 0.25%, I think now, and these banks are giving it to their clients for 5%. So within 20 years, you have not only created artificial money, but you have shifted the wealth from one part of the society to the other one. And as long as this is happening, how can you maintain a balance, what you called, no? What you stated, the balance between input and output?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
all
sure.
your good ideas you have, or not you, ours, you know, to have a just, sprawiedliwe, to have a just system is just brought down by the fact that you have a creation of money which is going exactly in another way. For a long time I have already the feeling that we have two currencies, because a currency which is dealt in the City of London with this money has nothing to do with our exchange system as we have in small shops, in our local societies and so on. I have the feeling as there is a link between the two systems, but the meaning, the function altogether is quite a different one.
Yeah,
we are talking of completely other levels and of
but you need, I mean, that's the thing. It's like there's no point trying to think about currency by itself. And so the point is that you need political systems around the issuance of money and its creation. All right, so you have democratic input into how money gets steered in society. All right, and that's something there's no quick fix to that. It's not like somehow you design a system, like a monetary system, which somehow is free of politics somehow. Of course, there's always politics, and that's always going to be the way money, at that large scale wealth distribution or redistribution is a political issue, and that's about democratic. It's the same way people have always organized. Organize locally and then build it up, and that's how it works. So there's no point thinking that somehow you can fix the monetary system without a political movement. So sometimes these local currencies, they're not necessarily trying to change the entire system, but they're important as kind of initial battlegrounds for people to learn stuff, stake out what they're trying to do, and then as a kind of a political organizing tool for bigger programs. But changing how the Federal Reserve System works, I mean, that's a pretty big task. So it might take a while as well. But also bear in mind, it's not just the monetary system. I mean, people fetishize sometimes money, and it's there's an entire economic system that's you've got to sometimes monetary reform groups pitch these ideas that if only you could just change the way money is created, somehow everything would be different. It's not necessarily that easy. But I'd say if you're ever trying to engage with economic issues, you should start with money, because people use money all the time, and so few people actually have any real intuitive understanding about how it works or what it is. Actually, so many economists don't understand what money is. So many people in the financial sector don't understand what money is. And I used to work in the financial sector. The financial sector is very good at moving money around, but very few people in the financial sector actually understand what it is that they move around and how it works. So a good starting point is which you clearly have done, but I urge everyone else to as well. If you can get your head around it, it becomes very interesting. Should I maybe close it there? I don't know how much we've gone a bit over time. So, but I'll be talking again tomorrow. At what time? 7 again.
7. Yes. Okay. So thank you very much, and thank you for this very interesting discussion.
Can I make one last thing? I mean, I haven't obviously covered all the dynamics of money in just an hour and a half. So if you want to go learn more, you should go. There's some very good writers about money. David Graeber is pretty good if you want to go check out his book. He wrote a huge book on money, which is very interesting if you have a month or two to read it. So David Graeber.
The history of debt.
Yeah, it's called Debt: The First 5,000 Years. He's an anthropologist, so he thinks more about how people have actually used things rather than just imposing sort of economic models and stuff. So he's good. But there's lots of other good writers on money as well. So.
Do you also write about money in your book, The Heretic's Guide to Global
I
Finance?
write a bit about money in here, so
Okay.
you know, this is quite a broad guide. It's not like an in-depth kind of like blow by blow kind of everything, and this is kind of trying to go an overview of the financial system. So it's more like a beginner's book. If you're trying to get a sense for the main issues in the financial sector, some cool ideas, you can get involved. But it's not like a 500-page kind of like. There's limits to what this book can do. It's sort of more general.
Okay.
But yes, if you're more beginner, definitely.
And you can get it just for 2 hours of service massage.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't
for
actually,
Brett.
I only actually bought I couldn't really bring very many. So, but they are.
Thank you.
Available.
Thank you very much.